Youth League, viva! Ayasaba Magwala. Ayasaba Magwala. Ayo, Autubole Pulu. Autubole Pulu. Autubole Pulu. Autubole Pulu. Ayasaba. Kiss the poor, the former. Kiss the poor, the former. Hilwatabata, Hariwataba, Hilwatabata. Shoot to kill, killer man. Shoot to kill, Hamasa. Station. Tambo was never a coward. And every time we sing about Tambo, we know that we are singing about a determined, fearless fighter of our revolution. And there is no one who's going to tell us how we should salute Tambo or praise up Tambo or remember Tambo. In song, as we see, we are saluting the generation that ushered us into democratic dispensation. Whether we are happy, whether we are angry, we sing. And people should never say we sing because we want to intimidate the white or want to kill them. We sing the songs of our Tambo sang at that time. The songs that kept it going. The songs that kept the forces together to fight and conquer the apartheid regime. It is this song that kept the MK soldiers in exile, kept them together to a point where democracy and freedom was delivered. It is this song that Solomon Mahlangu was killed for singing. Furthering the aims of the ANC at that time meant including singing the ANC songs. People were killed for singing this song.
WPFW 89.3 FM, Midday Jazz and Justice. Welcome everybody on this wonderful, beautiful Monday afternoon in the nation's capital for what we hope to be an equally powerful show stemming from our introduction, Hugh Masekela's, anybody out there. And then just there, Julius Malema, the head of the ANC Youth League, talking about the highly controversial song that has reemerged in news recently. That we are all that is leading us perfectly into a discussion we're going to have this afternoon. My good friends, colleagues, and comrades are in the building this afternoon. Dr. Todd Burroughs is live in the studio, and by phone we'll be joined in just a minute by Professor Frank Wilderson, who some will hopefully remember was an interviewee of ours a few months ago, or maybe even a year ago already at this point, talking about his book Incognegro, a memoir of exile and apartheid. So we're going to talk with him about specifically about Chris Hani this afternoon, whose assassination, the anniversary of his assassination was April 10th. He was assassinated in 1993. And we want to talk a little bit about what that assassination meant then and now, who Chris Hani was, and who he is in the memories of those who know him or knew of him, and in the context of what's happening now in South Africa, the United States, and around the world. So stay tuned. We have a lot more coming up. Frank Wilderson will be here in just a moment. Todd Burroughs is in the building. I'm Jared Ball, your host. More importantly, this is WPFW, and the show is Midday Jazz and Justice. Back in just a minute after these brief messages with our guests and what we think will be an exciting and powerful discussion this afternoon. So don't go anywhere. Much more on WPFW's Midday Jazz and Justice. Peace. But let's get right into it. Dr. Burroughs, welcome to the program. Frank Wilderson, thank you very much for coming on with us again this afternoon. Welcome.
Glad to be here again. Thank you. Hi, Todd.
Hey, Frank. How's it going?
I'm all right, man.
Man, I've been waiting to talk to you again. I have been waiting to talk to you again. There's so much we have to talk about.
I hear you.
Well, you know, I don't even know where to begin, but let's just get some of the basics out of the way. Frank, could you talk with us for a moment about Chris Hani, who he was, the important role he played and plays today, and how he even maybe figures in your book Incognegro, as we look to commemorate him at least briefly this afternoon.
Well, yes. I mean, one of the things that happens when you write a memoir, any form of creative nonfiction or creative fiction, is that the form of that kind of creative work is geared towards expressing the life and roles and experiences of individuals. So it's very difficult to give a very complex and sophisticated political analysis of all the players in a movement when you write a memoir. What Chris Hani did for me in the writing was he allowed me to have a kind of figurative lightning rod, a kind of individual presence through which I could talk about and give some ideas about, express a counter-narrative, a counter-ideology to the neoliberalism that was taking over the ANC by Mandela and his people. So I would have loved to have said Hani-ism in the episodes, a few episodes in which I talk about Hani the man, but talking about Hani the man and giving examples of what he did as chief of staff of Umkhonto we Sizwe and as head of the South African Communist Party, which he was later distancing himself from, allowed me to get to some of the political notes that might not have happened in a normal memoir. So Hani died, unfortunately, was murdered just a few months before his 51st birthday. Had he lived, a few things. People say that he agreed to the suspension of the armed struggle. In point of fact, Mandela announced the suspension of the armed struggle, kept MK soldiers and cadres for the most part out of the country while he solidified and consolidated power through the middle-class moderates in the ANC. This was a deal that he brokered with de Klerk to have a moderate ANC emerge from the unbanning in 1990 and have a radical ANC be subordinated to this above-ground moderate group. Hani, because he believed in solidarity and he believed in working out differences internally, did not break radically with Mandela at that moment. But what he did do, I think your listeners should know something that I think I mentioned on the last show, was that there are 100 people at this point in time between the period that I was there, 89 through 96, 100 people who ran the African National Congress, be like the Central Committee or the National Executive Committee of the ANC. They are elected by votes from 2,000 delegates at the sub-regional and regional level of the ANC chapters throughout the country. Nelson Mandela received 1,995 votes from 2,000 delegates. Chris Hani received 2,000 votes. So he had every single delegate voting for him, which shows, A, his popularity, and B, how sincere he was about pushing forward, not for a social democratic or even capitalist sellout, what we have today, but for a real socialist transformation. The other thing was that at the time of his death, he was stating publicly that because, and I'm oversimplifying here, people can go back and check his writing to get a more complex view, but he was stating publicly that even though he was head of the Communist Party, when the ANC came to power, that his positions and the positions of the masses were actually to the left of the Communist Party, and that he might have to break from the Communist Party and, after Mandela, run for president in a general election with another party. Well, that would have spelled disaster for the ANC and for the South African Communist Party both, because you would have the entire lumpen and most of the unskilled working-class black population going for a man like Hani. You would have many of the doctors and lawyers and teachers going for whoever Nelson Mandela's pick was going to be. And the numbers would be in Hani's favor. And we have a situation that would make Venezuela look like a playground transformation, a real revolution by way of the vote. So there's speculation, which I think there's a lot to be said there, about the possibility that key people in the ANC and perhaps the Communist Party were involved in Hani's assassination. He was a very dangerous man.
We're speaking with Frank Wilderson, author of Incognegro, a memoir of exile and apartheid this afternoon. And just quickly, I didn't do this at the top. Forgive me for not giving you a more appropriate introduction and biography.
But, we're doing what we need to do. That's all right.
Man, we're just rushing for time, because in the second hour, I want to let folks know we're going to have some youth poets come on. But in light of what this date meant and this time meant, I wanted to get sort of squeeze Frank in here. And people can check voxunion.com for our earlier discussion, and we'll link all that together. But I just wanted to get you on to quickly talk about Chris Hani, because it's a name, a powerful person that we don't often get to hear about. And your experience is one of the few, if not only, African Americans to be involved with the armed wing of the ANC struggle in South Africa. Gives you an important view of all of this, not to mention this book that is incredibly well written. So again, I want to invite Brother Burroughs in, because he's got, again, as he said at the top, he's been very anxiously awaiting, round 2 with you,
right.
And we will have to schedule a round 3 very soon, certainly before the summer's out, to we have a even more full discussion of all of this again. But
Jared, can I make one little footnote?
Please.
If you read a book by Ronnie Castros called Armed and Dangerous, he was like a commander right under Chris Hani and later became head of the National Intelligence Agency. What I know is that there have been 2 black Americans elected to above ground office in the ANC. Maddie Hall Zuma, who actually founded with other people the ANC Women's League in the 1940s, who was a black college student activist in the States, and then myself, who ran for office and was elected to the sub-regional executive of the ANC. But with respect to the underground, that's very hard to know. And there were a number of North Americans who did clandestine work in the underground. I suspect, because I didn't know them, that they came from Canada. But Ronnie Castros, in his book, won't actually say where they came from, and they haven't come forward. So I don't want to say that I was the only one doing underground work.
Okay, forgive me. But,
that's okay.
But go ahead. And go ahead, Todd. Let's go.
No problem, Jared. Frank, this book. this book Ellipse, right? I have to read more of this book out loud.
Go ahead. I love to hear you read it.
And I want you to comment on the sections on Hani that I want to read.
Okay.
Now, I'm here with the part where there were 2 groups that were fighting each other, and there were several people who were called, and people were too busy, and they couldn't do this, they couldn't do that. And as you said, Hani said where and when.
Exactly.
And he had come, and he had spoken. And you write here, we all filed out through the gauntlet of infantrymen. They were so close, we could see the color of their eyes. The front of our procession was halfway through the corridor when I was sure I heard a voice from the back say, "Kill the farmer, kill the boer." Then it came again from someone else, or maybe it was the same person yelling yet again. I thought Chris Hani would turn around and call for calm, but he made no such move. People were not simply walking, but they were toy-toying as well, which meant it would take nearly twice as long to move through this death trap. Hani seemed to slow his pace. The soldiers could have cut us all down. It would have been over in minutes, but they didn't. They let us pass. We marched with each group back to their respective hostels. Then Fable and I walked quietly out to the road where Chris Hani's Kombi was parked. We thanked them all for doing in a few hours what we could not have accomplished in 2 years. They didn't make us feel small for being unable to broker the truth by ourselves, nor did Chris Hani give us the impression that this had been a waste of his valuable time. In fact, he seemed energized by the whole affair, as though he'd just come in from an invigorating swim. The effort, he said, not the outcome. History will judge us by our efforts. Talk a little bit more about that.
Well, that was a really heart-stopping moment for me. I was working on the ANC Peace Commission for Johannesburg and the surrounding 16 surrounding townships. And this place in the Val Triangle towards the south had two hostels, which were basically shacks where single-sex shack, like dormitories where men live who are laborers. One of them was organized around someone who was aligned with the ANC MK, Umkhonto we Sizwe, and another one was aligned with ANC-affiliated organizations like trade unions, and they had gotten into a squabble over something I can't even remember, and 5 people had been killed. These hostels were a mile apart. In the meantime, both hostels were facing police violence and violence from Inkatha, the Inkatha Freedom Party, the Zulu nationalists who had been shipped in from KwaZulu-Natal to destabilize the area with massacres. And there was a battalion, I think it was 32 battalion, was there of white South African Army people. So our job, our job was twofold. Clandestinely, we were smuggling arms into various hostels and various squatter camps because the Soviet Union had dried up, was now defunct, and because Mandela didn't want any more arms to go into these people. And we were supplying the self-defense units so that they could fight the police and Inkatha and the military. But they started fighting each other, so we then did our above-ground thing, which the ANC Peace Commission was supposed to be doing, making peace, not distributing arms. And I'd been sent there to talk to the 2 heads of both hostels, and both of them had told me very politely that if I desired to go on living, that I should not come back and meddle with them. So they would have killed me if I kept telling them what to do. And we called members of the National Executive Committee, Mandela, Thabo Mbeki, others, Cyril Ramaphosa, and they just didn't want to get involved with it. And Hani came right away. So he went to one hostel, got everybody out of that hostel, maybe over 100 people, marched down the road to the second hostel, got everybody out of that hostel, and all these people were armed with machetes and small arms, and marched everybody into a soccer field. And he and I and Thabo and his bodyguards stood in the bleachers, and they were in the field, and he spoke to them about unity and the need to fight the Boer. Okay, that was okay. And I thought they were jeering him when he was talking. Actually, they could see through the bleachers, past and behind us, through the chain-link fence, where members of 32 Battalion and their armored personnel carriers had a mass, and they were yelling at the military, who had highly sophisticated weapons. So Hani then marched us out, and we actually marched through a gauntlet of these soldiers. And that's when people in the procession started shouting, "Kill the Boer, kill the farmer," and began toy-toying. And Hani decided to let everybody have some fun, right? So he slowed the walk down. I wanted to speed it up, you know. The soldiers were so intimidated. It was really quite amazing. And nothing actually happened. Hani had given a speech, which all the soldiers had heard, part in Xhosa and part in English, in which he said that we're showing deference to Mandela in this period by not continuing with the armed struggle, but to have negotiations. But if the negotiations don't go our way, if we don't get an economic settlement, then we're going to move on this power structure one more time. And there are interests on the far right, interests on the center right, meaning de Klerk, and interests on the far right, meaning the people in the Conservative Party who ultimately killed him, and interests inside the ANC that actually did not want to see this become a full-blown revolution.
This is Midday Jazz and Justice, WPFW 89.3 FM. You're listening to Frank Wilderson joining us this afternoon by phone, talking with us about Chris Hani, who was killed April 10th, 1993. And the continuing effects that this has had on not only South Africa but the world, and we're going to come back with him in just a moment. Dr. Todd Burroughs, my colleague at Morgan State University, is also in the house this afternoon to help us along with that. And we're going to step aside for a brief moment, let everybody catch their breath. We got a lot more to coming up on this issue in this first hour, and then we'll be joined in the next hour by some young poets from around the community, some very talented young people, and we'll continue on with them in the second hour. So don't go anywhere. A lot more coming up on Midday Jazz and Justice. Again, I'm Jared Ball. More importantly, this is WPFW 89.3 FM.
The organizers organizers of this film festival are the veterans of the anti-apartheid movement. They actually were the ones who were in prison. They were doing all of the organizing. They literally took to the streets and put their bodies in the way of the continuation of apartheid, and they were able to make a difference, the same kind of difference that we hope to be able to make in our own country. They toppled apartheid, but they did not topple the practical applications of apartheid, and that was the message that they really wanted me to experience while I was in Cape Town. They took me to the townships so that I could understand that the plight of blacks is still very dire. And in fact, while I was there were several unions that were out on strike. The country is in the midst right now of a series of general strikes because people are sick and tired and they're fed up. And despite the fact that the ANC is nominally in power, their lives have not really changed because the ANC ceded control of the economy over to the same people who still and always did have it under apartheid.
WPFW 89.3 FM Midday Jazz and Justice. I'm Jared Ball, your host. Welcome back, everybody, on this wonderful Monday afternoon. Just a little bit there from Mad Lib, The Train and the Pharaoh, musically. And then Cynthia McKinney talking about her recent trip to South Africa for a film festival were some of the issues that we're talking about this afternoon with our guests, Frank Wilderson, author of Incognegro, a memoir of exile and apartheid, and Dr. Todd Burroughs from Morgan State University's Communication Studies Department, are dealing with in this book and in this discussion as we commemorate the anniversary of the assassination of Chris Hani, more appropriately to commemorate the work and the ideology and the worldview of Chris Hani, and that he represented, and that we don't want to let be fully extinguished in the 21st century, considering, as Cynthia McKinney said, all with us. So Frank Wilderson, welcome back to the program. Thank you for joining us again this afternoon.
My pleasure.
And Dr. Burroughs, welcome to you back again.
Thank you very much. Frank, I definitely want to talk to you about the symbolism of Hani and how Mandela used Hani as a symbolism and even the death of whatever symbolic struggle we have left here in America. I definitely want to get to all that, but before I want to get to that, I want to read another part of Incognegro in which you talk about some of the aftermath, the immediate aftermath of Hani's death, and I want you to discuss this after I read this small segment. A crowd of disciplined mourners would be marching down the street, only to turn the corner and surrender to paralysis. Then the same mass of bodies would rock back and forth like a large sloshing wave, followed by the sound of breaking glass. From out of the same crowd, a throng of angry teenage boys carrying dried ears of corn would emerge. What on earth are they doing? One of the boys breaks a storefront window with a huge lead pipe, while the other boys set the ears of corn alight. A poor person's Molotov. They throw the flaming ears of corn inside and set the building ablaze. Then the paralysis would set in again, and the crowd did what seemed to be nothing. A mass catharsis in the street as cars and shops burned all around, each man and woman clinging to the autonomy of their grief, each man and woman demanding that their grief be admitted to the sea of grief. Then someone said, "Chris Hani, where are you? Chris Hani, where are you?" Nelson Mandela went on television and demanded, with, quote, "all the authority at my command," unquote, that people remain calm. Honor the memory of Chris Hani by remaining a disciplined force for peace. A young man standing near me in the crowd sneered, "Hani's death is the best thing that ever happened to you." No one reproached him. No one raised a hand when he picked up a stone and smashed the window and climbed over the jagged glass and one by one smashed the television sets with their flickering images of Madiba. The people set fire to the store. Mandela sent his protege, Thabo Mbeki, to Chris Hani's house in Boksburg, only to have Mbeki jeered and cursed by more than 10,000 people, the way they had once jeered and cursed the South African police. Nelson Mandela retreated to his home in Soweto. When he arrived, he was booed. Now, there are two activists here, Trevor and Stamela. Trevor is white, and I just wanted to say that before reading this part, because it's important to know once you hear this part. Trevor and Stamela's faces were dry and taut, as though they had been crying for days. I'd walked with them east of the steady slope of Jorrison Street and Braamfontein. We hadn't spoken since we left the rally at Wits. The sun reflecting off the sidewalk warmed the cool autumn air. We were on our way to Hillbrow. 3 days had passed since Chris Hani died. A twilight child approached us. His nose was dry with snot. His hair hadn't been combed in ages. His clothes were sooty, and so was his skin. He held his hand out to Trevor. "Boss, please, 2 bob for some chips." Trevor pulled his gun out from under his shirt. The boy froze. He was too paralyzed to run. Trevor snapped the clip from the butt of the gun and handed the boy a bullet. Then he handed him a large note. Perhaps it was 20 rand. "Here," he said, "buy a gun and kill a white politician." The terror in the boy's eyes melted away. He was still holding the bullet and the money, and we'd only walked a few feet when Stamela turned back. He ejected a bullet from his gun and gave it to the boy with another bill. "Then wait 5 years," he said, "and kill a black politician." Talk to me a little bit about that, Frank.
Well, first let me say that I'm an associate professor at the University of California. So I'm not going to admit to anything that I did in those riots.
No, Frank, we're talking about what you've written down here as a witness.
Okay,
that's what we're talking about. And I'm a lecturer at Morgan State University, and Dr. Ball is an assistant professor at Morgan State University. So we're having an intellectual discussion here.
Thank you very much for clarifying that.
Oh, yes, sir. Yes, very much so.
Given the Patriot Act, we don't want to. So here's the deal. It's like we all had a massive and mass heart attack when we woke up and found that Hani was really dead. Part of it had to do with we knew how fragile the context of true revolution was, in that with the end of the Soviet bloc, which was by no means a bloc that I supported, I considered my politics to be to the left of the South African Communist Party, which was basically a tail being wagged by the Soviet dog. But nonetheless, the Soviets poured tons of money and material and logistical support into the ANC in general and Mkhonto weSizwe specifically, which counterbalanced the $400 million that the Scandinavian countries poured into the ANC that basically went to moderate initiatives. We knew that with that gone, we were facing a situation in which the moderates were powerful inside the ANC because moderation and right-wing politics was now powerful in the world. And Hani was someone who had power in the ANC and didn't really care about the balance of forces having been lost. He was moving forward. And his presence elaborated, kind of facilitated the political voices and political work of people like myself who would be considered non-aligned communists. It also was a kind of thing. I'm not going to say that Hani was a feminist, a black feminist, but what I'm going to say is that he would not participate in the marginalization and the purging of Winnie Mandela, who was a major symbolic figure for black feminism and for the black poor of both genders in South Africa. He made it very clear through his public alliances and his underground work with her and all the other ways in which he postured and worked inside the ANC that he was not part of Thabo Mbeki or Nelson Mandela's initiative to purge her, and that he saw her as being, a colleague and a comrade for the coming revolution. So there are all kinds of things. Trevor and Stamela, for example, were people who were very close to him. I was not. close to him. I was a grunt who was run by them, but I met him on a couple of times, and Hani knew the value of research and reflection and political theory, and so he had been working with them, although this work became derailed, on trying to write another Wretched of the Earth, Frantz Fanon's great book, that would be specifically modeled, a handbook for the Black Revolution that would be modeled on trying to think through the compromises and the sellouts of the black bourgeoisie in South Africa. He knew that we needed action, but we also needed political theory. And so when Stamela says, wait 5 years and kill a black politician, he's speaking out of his dialogue and his research and his writing that he and Trevor are doing with Hani with this text that never gets written. What people on the ground, ordinary people who could barely read or write, understood was that Hani or Haniism was a kind of umbrella structure which would whether we were right in this belief or wrong in this belief, this is our belief, that would house our capacity to forge subversive and revolutionary voices inside the ANC and inside the movement generally, as it was beginning to sell out to Al Gore and Bill Clinton and the West. And once his death happened, I mean, within days and weeks of his death, we found South African Communist Party members scurrying to change their political position to make it more in line with Thabo Mbeki and Nelson Mandela, in hopes that they would then get future jobs in the new dispensation. I mean, you found the highly placed notables of even the staunch left jumping ship and leaving the masses abandoned. We have now a situation in which the death is significant. I'm not going to say that the death caused the situation that we are in now, in which the lifespan of the average black South African is 13 years less. So people die 13 years before schedule than when they were living under apartheid. AIDS, housing, 2 million houses were lost in this whole so-called democratic period. But what I think is even more disheartening is that we don't have a political vocabulary amongst the masses or on the left that can critique and be a kind of center or force against the political, in contradistinction to the political vocabulary of this kind of petty bourgeois affirmative action neoliberalism that the ANC is spouting. And what that means is that the deeper you go into that, in which the poor and black people generally, and the black poor in particular, don't have a political voice and lose a political language, then you get something like what's known in the political equivalent of what's known in linguistics as phatic, P-H-A-T-I-C, phatic communication, which is a kind of pure protest signaling presence. It's just an utterance of, here I'm here, notice me, note me. And that kind of cry, collectivized, can easily turn into acts of violence which are not resonant with political theory. And what happens is that the general media and populace and the black middle class can easily criminalize those performances of what is political violence but doesn't have political vocabulary, and turn the new state against the very people that should be leading us into revolution.
Well, Frank Wilderson, we have to step aside for another quick moment, but I want to come back and pick up right there with this question of the recent killing that has sparked a lot of news attention around the world. You mentioned the victim of that killing in your book. I want to put that into quick context and then get your quick response to the news that Jennifer Hudson will be playing Winnie Mandela in a new film directed by Clint Eastwood. So we'll talk about that briefly in just a minute right here on Midday Jazz and Justice, WPFW 89.3 FM. Back in just a minute. Welcome back, WPFW 89.3 FM, Midday Jazz and Justice. Jared Ball here. Doctors Todd Burroughs and Frank Wilderson are also here talking with us about Chris Hani, the late great leader in South Africa, killed on April 10th, 1993, and the legacy of that killing and what it meant then and means today. Frank, if we could, we only have a few minutes, unfortunately, so again, we will have you back at some point before the summer gets too long. But I did want to ask you, first of all, I wanted to thank you for quickly outlining with this discussion of FATIC communication what is going on in the United States currently as well, particularly within the black community and the left in general. We don't know what to do, basically. We don't have the proper vocabulary to deal with what's happening under the Obama administration. So I think that there are direct links that could be drawn there, and we'll maybe pick up on that another time. But I did want to ask you, this news recently, we played at the top of the hour, the brother, the head of the African National Congress Youth League, and the song "Kill the Boer" that is drawing a lot of attention, especially in the light of the killing of E.T. I can't remember his name even. I don't even.
Eugene Terre'Blanche.
Exactly. Thank you. And he figures in your book, not prominently, but he figures in your book. Could you talk a little bit about who he was and maybe put some context behind, or even give your response to his killing this past few weeks?
Yeah, it would be. I think it's impossible. The ANC now is trying to depoliticize his killing, to talk about it as a kind of a internal dispute between the black farm workers on his farm and him over money or something. I don't remember.
And he was a white Afrikaner who spoke openly, and even at the Truth and Reconciliation Commission, for our listeners who aren't familiar, of having happily almost killed black people at random as sport, and then was given forgiveness and his property back. Thank
you for that. Yes. So the AWB, a long Afrikaner name that I can't scratch to get at right at the moment. To simplify it, we could call it the Ku Klux Klan in paramilitary outfits, but highly, highly popular amongst the white Afrikaner population, very much involved in a series of coups and destabilizations in the homeland. And he celebrated the death of Chris Hani when the Polish immigrant murdered him. Eugene Terre'Blanche celebrated this publicly at a rally and said he wished he had done it himself. So this was a man who F.W. de Klerk was playing to a lot, or playing, in the sense where he said, if de Klerk would say during negotiations, I can't do something because Terre'Blanche and the right will start a civil war. It was easy for him to use Terre'Blanche as a kind of boogeyman to tell us that we needed to make concessions unless to keep Terre'Blanche and his people in their place. So, I have no remorse or feelings of sadness over his death. I have no hyperbolic feelings of glee. I think that tragedy is not in his death, but is in the fact that we're at this point where it's even possible for ANC politicos to talk about this in a way that is lacking politics. And if Hani were alive, we would politicize this, and it would be contextualized in a way that would be helpful. So you had another question? Well,
I know among the work that you do, you are also, a media scholar, and you have a book, I think, that's either just come out or soon to come out on
just
film
came out a few days ago.
Okay, well, I'll have to get that, and we'll use that as the basis for our next discussion. But in your work as a film critic, or how do you think we could predict what we're going to see with this film that's going to star Jennifer Hudson about Winnie Mandela, that Winnie herself has distanced herself from, and even threatened to sue over? That's going to be directed by Clint Eastwood. Any predictions?
Would you have Richard Nixon chair a meeting of the left somewhere in D.C.? No. So why would you have Clint Eastwood, number one, direct anything related to any of us? The right-wing mayor of Carmel, a major proponent of the NRA. But something else, people don't go to South Africa to find prominent black actors to play, Malcolm X or Martin Luther King. So we have to ask ourselves about the imperial gesture through which Hollywood continuously decides that black Americans are more qualified to play black South Africans than black South Africans. This is us as black American actors participating in a white supremacist and ultimately anti-black media gesture when the other way wouldn't happen. Secondly, I can't imagine a movie about Winnie Mandela being financed by capitalists that didn't do one of two things, or both. One would be to demonize her for what I believe to be the wonderful role she played in facilitating the Underground Railroad, which allowed for many, many young women and men to escape South Africa and go into the guerrilla training camps in the frontline states. So I see a movie predicated on a demonization of her work that she did underground with Hani and his people, and for the so-called necklacing problems and the Stompy, the murder of the little boy who was killed by some of her bodyguards. That would be one problem that I would see the movie would have to have if it was being financed in the United States. Or the other problem would be a kind of cathedralization of her, in a sentimental cathedralizing of her in the way that Rosa Parks is sentimentalized and cathedralized. Either kind of movie, which I've just described, I hope I'm wrong, would be the only kind of movie that Hollywood would finance with a black American actress. Either one would be a cover story that would mystify rather than clarify the relations of power that Winnie Mandela has struggled all her life to dismantle. And the other thing that it would do is it would take, all the stuff about Winnie Mandela going to court and possibly having a role in the killing of Stompy. Let's call that the wrong question. Let's call that the wrong question, because it assumes that people like Nelson Mandela didn't send out assassination hits from Robben Island. It would assume that as the president of the ANC and ultimately Chris Hani's boss, that the bombings and assassinations that we initiated during the apartheid era, that somehow Nelson Mandela was removed from that because he was a pacifist, and Winnie Mandela should be demonized as a criminal. It's a very, very unsophisticated, moralizing, and ultimately destructive way to talk about armed struggle.
Well, clearly, we in the United States don't have any understanding of the kinds of contradictions you're raising. As our Nobel Peace Prize winning president is currently bombing any number of hundreds of thousands of people on a daily and weekly basis.
Thank you.
But Frank Wilderson, author of Incognegro, a memoir of exile and apartheid, and what's the name of your new book?
Red, White, and Black: Cinema and the Structure of U.S. Antagonisms.
Oh, look, we got it. We got to come back.
Well, we will immediately, upon leaving today's show, begin to schedule with you that next visit because give you more time, because there's just too many things. I wanted to ask you about Chris Hani's relationship with Steve Biko.
I wanted to ask about Fred Hampton, because
that's right.
Hani is used in terms of the literature of this wonderful book, Incognegro. Hani is used as almost a refrain for Fred Hampton, and I wanted to get into that.
Well, we will.
Okay.
Frank, again, I thank you very much. We reached out to you very quickly. You're very gracious with your time. We appreciate it, and we will look to get you back on right away. And we have to acknowledge publicly how difficult it is to get Brother Burroughs out to join us. So and for you, he's willing to do it, even for just an hour. So this is really a powerful moment.
I wore my Fred Hampton shirt. I said I had to come correct for Frank Wilderson. I wore my Fred Hampton shirt, took it out of mothball.
Even by phone, he had to come correct for his Fred Hampton shirt.
That's right.
So Frank, we really appreciate your work, and again, we just can't say enough of how brilliantly written this book is.
Thank you.
Thank you, and I love this show.
Thank you very much. You'll be back again very soon. So thank you very much again, Frank Wilderson. Joining us by phone this afternoon from his office out there at the University of California, Berkeley.
Where he is an associate professor.
He is an associate professor and a scholar and an intellectual.
That's right.
And that's it.
Yes.
And we are scholars and intellectuals and radio hosts, and that's it.
Thank you.
And I make no pretense to be anything else.
Emphasize that point, yes.
We just wanted to raise some questions, because we want to pay some tribute to Chris Hani. It's unfortunate that so much of his great work is lost, as many great people's work is lost in the shuffle. So